Sarah Whittaker smiled as the handcuffs clicked shut, and Daniel Crowley was already in the ground. In the quiet, wooded suburb of Crestwood Falls, life moved slowly. The streets were lined with tidy lawns, bicycles left in driveways, and the occasional chalk drawings smeared across the pavement. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved from porches, and the local diner knew everyone's name. Among the families that called this peaceful town home were Sarah Whittaker and Daniel Crowley, a couple known more for their routine than for any drama. From the outside, theirs was the kind of life that inspired admiration, or at the very least, comfort. 2 kids, a modest home, and seemingly no problems worth gossiping about. Sarah had mastered the art of appearances. Her social media pages told a story of happiness and balance baking cookies with the kids, park trips, birthday balloons, and anniversary dinners. Her captions were always upbeat, full of emojis and inspirational quotes about love and motherhood. To those who followed her online, Sarah was a devoted mom and partner. In town, she was polite but private, where she rarely stayed long at school functions or community events. She smiled, offered brief conversation, and was gone before anyone could ask more than a few questions. Daniel, on the other hand, was quiet in a way that didn't draw attention. He was the type of man who kept his head down and worked hard. He spent long hours at the auto repair shop, saving up for a family vacation they never quite managed to take. He didn't have many close friends, but he was dependable, always showing up when someone needed a hand. He seemed content to let Sarah take the lead in their public life, appearing only occasionally in photos, usually holding one of the kids or standing behind Sarah with a tired smile. Behind their closed front door, things were different. The house, while clean and well-kept, often sat in a heavy silence. Neighbors noticed that Daniel rarely came outside except to leave for work, and Sarah was usually seen alone with the children. There were no loud arguments, no visible signs of trouble, just a sense that something was off. It's hard to place, but impossible to ignore once you noticed it. Still, in a town like Crestwood Falls, where people prized their privacy, no one said much. Daniel's sister, Michelle, had been the only one to express concern. A few weeks before everything unraveled, she told a coworker that Daniel had seemed distant on the phone. He mentioned being exhausted and overwhelmed, but wouldn't say why. He brushed off questions and changed the subject quickly. Michelle assumed it was work stress. After all, Daniel had never complained much before. She couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. Nothing, however, prepared the town for what would happen next. When Daniel disappeared one sunny September morning, Sarah's story would spark the first of many questions. The woman who once seemed like a loving mother and partner would soon become the center of a chilling investigation, one that would expose a darkness no one saw coming. The first sign that something was wrong came when Daniel Crowley didn't show up for his Monday shift at the auto shop. He had worked there for nearly a decade and had never missed a day without calling. His supervisor, initially thinking it was a simple oversight, called Daniel's cell phone repeatedly. No answer. By noon, concern had turned into unease. Daniel wasn't the kind of person to vanish without explanation. The shop contacted Sarah, who claimed he'd left the house the previous night after an argument and hadn't returned. She sounded calm. She said he needed space sometimes. According to her, he walked out just before midnight, saying he was going to clear his head. She assumed he'd be back by morning. But morning came and went, and Daniel was nowhere to be found. His phone, still ringing, was located in the drawer of the kitchen counter. His wallet sat untouched beside it. His keys were on the hook by the front door. The police were contacted later that afternoon, and a missing persons case was opened. Officers visited the Whittaker home and spoke with Sarah in the living room, while the children played in the background. Unaware of the storm that was beginning to gather, she repeated her story without hesitation. Daniel had walked out. She didn't follow him. She didn't know where he'd gone. She suggested he might have gone to stay with a friend, or simply wanted a break. But something about her demeanor didn't sit right. She wasn't frantic or worried. She didn't cry. She didn't ask the officers for help finding him. She simply offered them a cup of coffee and talked about how stressful life had been lately. The officers noted that the house was overly tidy, especially for a home with 2 young children. The living room had the faint scent of bleach, but Sarah explained she'd done some deep cleaning over the weekend. Still, they found her strangely composed, even detached. As part of their routine investigation, police canvassed the area. None of the neighbors had seen Daniel in the last 24 hours. Several security cameras on nearby homes were checked, but none showed him leaving the house. Then, a curious piece of footage emerged from a nearby gas station. At exactly 2:17 a.m., only a few hours after Daniel supposedly walked out, Sarah's SUV was seen pulling into the lot. She was alone, wearing a hoodie and gloves, and purchased gas and 2 large rolls of black trash bags. She paid in cash. Her visit lasted only 5 minutes. This caught the attention of detectives. If Daniel had walked out of the house late at night, why was Sarah out driving alone shortly afterward, and why did she need those supplies? Investigators obtained a warrant to search the house more thoroughly. In the backyard, a section of the soil behind the shed appeared recently disturbed. Cadaver dogs were brought in. 3 days after Daniel's disappearance, officers discovered a shallow grave just beyond the tree line. Inside, wrapped in plastic and covered with trash bags, was Daniel Crowley's body. His face was bruised, and there were ligature marks around his neck. A child's blanket, faded with cartoon bears, was tucked under his arm. The quiet town of Crestwood Falls would never be the same again. News of Daniel Crowley's body being found spread quickly through Crestwood Falls, casting a shadow over the town that lingered like a storm cloud. The initial shock was soon followed by disbelief, as police confirmed that Sarah Whittaker had been arrested in connection with his death. Residents struggled to reconcile the image of the cheerful mother they had known with the cold reality of what was now unfolding. The woman who had once posted cheerful family photos online was now in handcuffs, escorted silently into the county jail. But what unsettled people the most wasn't the crime itself, it was Sarah's reaction. In the courtroom during her arraignment, she showed no signs of distress. As the charges were read aloud, first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, obstruction, Sarah's lips curled into a smirk. When the judge asked if she understood the charges, she laughed. A short, sharp laugh that echoed through the room and sent chills through those present. It was not the sound of confusion or nerves, it was something colder. Reporters and observers who had packed the courtroom struggled to make sense of her behavior. Her public defender claimed that Sarah's emotional response was a symptom of trauma, possibly an involuntary reaction to stress. But prosecutors and spectators saw it differently. They saw it as a glimpse into a darker side of Sarah Whittaker, one that had been hidden behind the polished mask of motherhood and domestic life. Detectives began piecing together a timeline of events leading up to Daniel's death. Forensic evidence told a grim story. Blood had been discovered beneath newly installed laminate flooring in the hallway. The pattern suggested that Daniel had been struck from behind, collapsed, and was then dragged across the floor. Trace amounts of blood had seeped into the cracks between the floorboards. Sarah had purchased the flooring materials just 1 day after Daniel disappeared. In the garage, investigators found an empty roll of duct tape, cleaning supplies, and remnants of plastic bags that matched those found at the burial site. Surveillance footage from a local hardware store showed Sarah buying all of these items. She had even rented a carpet cleaner, though the carpet itself showed little sign of recent activity. It appeared she had gone to great lengths to sanitize specific areas of the home. One piece of evidence stood out above the rest. A small life insurance policy in Daniel's name, one of 3, had been recently updated, listing Sarah as the sole beneficiary. Though Sarah refused to give a confession, the evidence was overwhelming. Her silence, paired with that disturbing courtroom laugh, painted a picture of calculated coldness. Friends of the couple, once hesitant to believe Sarah could be capable of such violence, now found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. The town was no longer just mourning a tragedy. It was grappling with the horrifying realization that the killer had been smiling all along. As investigators delved deeper into Sarah Whittaker's past, a darker picture began to emerge, one that contradicted the wholesome image she had crafted over the years. On the surface, Sarah appeared to be a stay-at-home mother with a quiet life centered around her children. But behind the filtered photos and curated social media posts was a history that pointed to something far more sinister. One of the first things detectives uncovered was Sarah's previous engagement to a man named Tyler Reese, nearly a decade earlier. They had been together for 3 years before he died in what was ruled an accidental house fire. Sarah was the only person home at the time, but she escaped with minor injuries, claiming she had been asleep when the fire started. Fire investigators later determined the blaze was caused by faulty wiring, and the case was closed. At the time, no one suspected anything unusual. But now, with Daniel's murder under scrutiny, the circumstances of that fire no longer seemed so simple. Sarah had received a small payout from a renter-s insurance policy after Tyler's death, just enough to start fresh. In Crestwood Falls, financial records painted another troubling portrait. Sarah had been making significant cash purchases in the months leading up to Daniel's murder. She bought designer clothes, an expensive handbag, and even made a down payment for a luxury cruise scheduled for later that year. She had paid for these things in cash, never drawing from the joint account she shared with Daniel. Investigators found envelopes of money stashed in the back of her closet, tucked behind old photo albums. It was clear she had been preparing for a major change, one that didn't include her partner. The most chilling discovery, however, came in the form of a worn, leather-bound journal found in her bedroom. Tucked under the mattress, the journal appeared at first to be filled with benign lists, grocery items, appointments, and childcare notes. But as detectives flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. Several entries stood out, with titles like Starting Fresh and Steps to Peace. In one passage, she wrote about the need to cut ties with chaos and remove the weight that was holding her back. One list was particularly disturbing. It included phrases like final move, cover tracks, and no turning back. At the bottom, underlined twice, was the word freedom. In the days before Daniel's death, Sarah had also been distancing herself from friends and extended family. Text messages revealed her gradually cutting off contact, canceling visits, and avoiding phone calls. She had even withdrawn the children from a local playgroup without explanation. Those closest to her thought she was simply overwhelmed. No one imagined she was planning something deadly. All of this painted a portrait of a woman who had been meticulously preparing for a new life without the man she once claimed to love. Daniel hadn't just been a victim of sudden violence. He had been an obstacle in a calculated plan. Sarah didn't act on impulse. She acted with purpose. And when it was all over, she didn't mourn him. She laughed. The trial of Sarah Whittaker became a national sensation almost overnight. The combination of a shocking crime, an apparently loving mother turned accused murderer, and her unnerving behavior in court drew intense public attention. News outlets camped outside the courthouse. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. People were horrified, but they couldn't look away. The courtroom was filled to capacity as opening arguments began. The prosecution laid out a chilling narrative of premeditated murder, supported by a mountain of evidence, security footage, financial records, forensic findings, and Sarah's own handwritten journal. They described a woman who had quietly planned her partner's death, while continuing to post smiling family photos online. She had gone shopping for trash bags, bleach, and gloves, just days before the murder. She had researched how long it took to claim a life insurance payout. She had buried the father of her children in a shallow grave just beyond the backyard fence. The defense team tried to portray Sarah as a woman in crisis, overwhelmed by the pressures of domestic life and driven to an act of desperation. They suggested she may have suffered from a dissociative mental state, possibly brought on by undiagnosed trauma. But when pressed for medical documentation or psychological evaluations, they offered little. There was no formal diagnosis, no history of mental illness, only vague claims of emotional distress. The most powerful testimony came from Daniel's sister, Michelle. Fighting back tears, she described how her brother had grown distant and exhausted in the months before his death. She recalled the final phone call they shared and the sinking feeling she had afterward. Her words moved the courtroom to silence. No one could ignore the human cost of what had happened. Forensic analysts took the stand next, explaining in precise detail how Daniel's blood had been found in multiple places throughout the house, even after Sarah's attempts to clean and conceal the evidence. The jury was shown photographs of the burial site, the child's blanket, the gloves Sarah wore the night she was caught on camera, and the entries in her journal that outlined her plan to start over. After 2 weeks of testimony, the prosecution rested its case. The jury deliberated for just 5 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. As the courtroom held its breath, the judge read the decision aloud. Then it happened again. Sarah smiled. Not a full laugh this time, just a small, knowing grin that sent a ripple of unease through the room. There was no apology, no visible remorse. Just that same eerie detachment that had followed her from the start. The judge called her behavior deeply disturbing and indicative of a lack of empathy. He sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Sarah was led away in cuffs, Daniel's family wept, but she didn't look back. In the months that followed, people in Crestwood Falls began locking their doors more carefully. The playground where Sarah used to take her children grew quieter. Life moved on, but the shadow of what she had done lingered. The story of the mother who smiled after burying her children, his father became a haunting reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters wear the calmest masks.